Hi, welcome to Building Your Own Computer. My name is Robb Tracy and I'm an instructor with Nebo Technical Institute. In this video, we're going to teach you how to build your own personal computer system. Now, I myself have been building computer systems for about 10 years now. I've built them for personal use, I've built them to sell, and I've also built them as a part of my job at different companies. Over the years, I've learned a lot of things about building computers. I've learned what to do, and I've learned what not to do. I'm going to convey those to you as we go through this video. Now, as we progress through this video, we're going to cover every aspect of building a computer. We're going to talk about how to select the correct parts, put them together. We're going to talk about how to partition and format right when you're done. And we're going to talk about how to install an operating system as well. Now, at this point, you might be asking, what's the benefit of building your own computer system? Isn't it just a lot easier to run down to the store and purchase a system? Well, actually, there are a lot of benefits to building your own computer. The advantage of building a PC system is cost. You can build your own personal computer for much less than you can buy one out of a store. The second advantage to building your own computer system is that of quality. Now, if a computer store or a discount retailer or whatever and you need a computer with a very low price, beware, okay? Reason why a really low price. The reason computer manufacturers can sell these computers at such a low cost is because they don't use high quality components in those lower end systems. The third advantage to building your own computer system is reliability, okay? Believe it or not, computers that are purchased off the shelf, electronic store or a retailer, they don't have the greatest track record with reliability. In fact, many manufacturers have an alarmingly high on-arrival rate. We call it DOA. That is computer systems that are just dead from the time you open the box. They never even work for a minute. The fourth advantage to building your own computer system is reliability. Now, a computer manufacturer a computer needs to make a system that appeals to lots of different people. So what they do is they build basically a generic system that doesn't do anything well but does a lot of things fairly well. They don't know what it is you want to do, so they try to bases. Build your own system. You can build it the way you want. You may say, you know what, I want the system to be a really high-end rock and sound system, so I'm going to purchase the best audio board money can buy. Now, in addition to cost, quality, reliability, and customizability, there's a fifth benefit of a computer system, and that is the fact that because you built it, if you ever down the road, year or two down the road, ever have a problem with that PC system, you're going to be able to fix it yourself because you know that system. You built it. You know every part that's inside that computer. So those are the advantages of building your own computer system. Those are the reasons to build your own computer system too. Having done it both ways over the years, I much prefer building my own system as opposed to purchasing one. In fact, I vowed never to purchase a system off the shelf ever again because of the advantages that we've talked about. So with that, let's get our hands dirty and start building our PC system. The first step in building your system is to gather the tools and purchase the computer you're going to need to build your PC. The first thing we need to look at here is the tools that you're going to need in order to build your PC system. Now, most computer stores will sell a very basic computer toolkit. It's great for building PCs. Right here I want to show you. The thing that you'll use most of the time, 99% of the time, old-fashioned screwdriver. However, there are times when you'll need a flat-bladed screwdriver, and you may also need a socket or a Torx bit as well. That's what I love about this particular toolkit. It's got everything I need all in one. Over here is a driver handle. It does a socket right here into which bits can be inserted, and it ratchets so I can tighten or loosen
whatever I need. And if I can't quite get a good turn on it, I can just sit here and go like this. Okay. It also, little locking collar here that allows me to rotate it so I can pat down in some really tight place. I love this toolkit. This driver handle itself doesn't have any bits. They're stored over here, and I've got just about everything. I've got good old-fashioned Phillips bit right here. If I need to use some screws that use a Phillips type head, well, I've got it. In fact, I've got about 3 different sizes. Okay, that's probably what you'll use most of the time, is the Phillips bit. I've also found to have a pair of either needle nose pliers or of tweezers such as this. Why? Because I drop screws all the time when I'm building, and they get down to the most difficult place to reach they can possibly find inside the case. Sometimes it's way too narrow to get my big fat fingers in there. Something like this. Get that screw and pull it back out is useful. In fact, it's so useful that I have 2 different types. This one's really handy too. This works on a bit different, like a little claw. If I push this out, you can see those little fingers coming out of the end. If I've got a screw down somewhere that I can't reach, I can grab a hold of the screw, track the handle, pull that screw out. Okay. I also, in my toolkit, keep a case right here that's full of screws and standoffs and clips and what I think I might need when I'm building a system. Now, tools ready, the next thing you need to do is purchase the components you're going to need to build your PC system. Now, before we go any farther, you need to understand that you should watch all the way through this video before you go out and buy your components. As we go through, I'm going to teach you the criteria that you should use to select each of these individual components, because components aren't compared to others, so you need to buy the right ones. Right here I'm going to give you a list so you can write down a shopping list and get it ready to go, and then as you go through the video you'll learn exactly what type of each component you need to buy. So what do you need? Well, first of all, you need a PC case, the case that holds all the different components. Next, you'll also need a power supply. You'll also need a mother. You'll need a central processing unit or CPU. You'll need memory. You'll need a video adapter. You'll need a floppy disk drive, a hard disk drive. You'll need a CD or a DVD drive. You'll need a monitor. And then you'll need some optional expansion boards depending on what you want the system to do. And a mouse and a keyboard. Now, you might be asking the question, where do I go to get these components? Well, there's lots of different sources. Your first option is a local computer or discount retail store. Another option for purchasing computer parts, and one that's my favorite option, is to search the net and find the web stores that sell computer components. There is one other option for purchasing computer parts that a lot of people like, and that is buying them off of auction websites. Now, before we actually building our PC system, we need to talk about 2 more topics. These are very important topics, and I want you to pay very close attention to what I'm going to say. These topics use safety and to electrostatic discharge. Let's talk about safety first. Understand that working on a system is a relatively safe proposition. There still are a couple of things that you must keep in mind to keep yourself safe while you're building your own PC. Rule number 1, I want you to write this down on a paper and put a big exclamation point by it. Never work on the PC if it's plugged in to the wall. In fact, when I work these, I not only unplug this end, but I also unplug this end of the power cable. Now there's another issue you need to be aware of, and that is never, never, never open up a PC monitor and try to work on anything, okay? Here's the reason why. Inside of a PC monitor, there are components that store electricity, and we're talking about tons of large. We're talking about 20,000 volts of AC power. The issue is that even if you unplug that monitor, those components inside the monitor retain that horrendous charge for years. If you open up that PC or that monitor and touch the wrong thing, you will get shocked and it will probably... Now, before we go on, there's one other topic we talk about, and that is electrostatic discharge. You're thinking, what on earth is he talking about? Electrostatic discharge, what is that? It's static, okay? And you've probably experienced static many times in your life. Well, that's an electrostatic discharge. The reason we're concerned about it here is because a static discharge like that can absolutely destroy computer components that you're working on. And here's the important part. You can see and feel that spark. That means you had a static discharge of around 10 to 15,000 volts. When you're dealing with computer components like a memory chip or an expansion card or a CPU, it only takes about 200 to 300 volts to damage or destroy that component. That means you could be working on your PC, shocking the living daylights out of those components, destroying them with electrostatic discharge. You don't even know it or feel it. All right? So, when building your PC, you need to take appropriate static preventative measures. One of the best things you can do is use a static mat. This red piece of plastic that you see right here is an anti-static mat. Some people call it a static dissipative mat. Its job is to provide conductivity between the PC system that we're working on and myself. Okay? Providing equilibrium between the case and me, we make sure that no electrical charge builds up. Now, the proper way to use a static mat is to first put the case on it, and then notice up here in the corner there's this little snap. The mat comes with this little device here that snaps onto it. That provides electrical conductivity between the mat and the two wires coming off of this little snap. Now, one end of this snap has this little clip. We take this clip and we hook the case. That provides connectivity between the mat and the case. And then on the other end of the mat is this band. And if you look inside, little metal part right here, this touches your... So I slip this on like this. Now, there can be no static discharge between me and I'm working on in this case because we're connected. Now, when you are with components, electrical components that go inside your computer, that they are shipped to you in these mylar. These may appear to be just typical regular old mylar bags. Not. These are static shielding bags. Static shielding bags because they are designed to dissipate any charge that might accident them through an electrostatic discharge. Thumb is, whenever you're dealing with a component, always keep it inside of a static bag until when you're ready to use it, make sure you're working on top of a stack. With that, we're actually ready now to start system. All right, let's go. Now, when you're building your PC, components you're probably going to need to be concerned with are the case and the power supply. And let's talk about the case. The case is just that. It's the case that all the parts are in. It's what you see. It's the outside of the computer unit itself. Now, cases come in a variety of sizes, colors, and form factors. Let's take a look at the different size that cases. The desktop case looks just something like this. It's a flat case that sits on top of a desk, usually with a monitor right on top. Now, the desktop case was popular for quite some time. However, most of the cases you're probably going to be working with are called the mini tower case. Now, a mini tower case basically is a desktop case turned on its side, and it sits on the ground because they fit under desks really well. However, if you're going to be building a system that's going to use a lot of hard drives or a lot of CD or DVD drives, then the desktop case and the mini tower case probably aren't going to cut it. They just don't have enough room for all those devices. In that situation, you need a full tower case. Now, in addition to case size, you also need to deal with the case's form factor.
Now all the form factor is a specification for the type of power supply and the position of the motherboard in the case. When you're buying a case, there are three form factors you need to be aware of. The first one is called the AT form factor. AT is very old. It's not implemented much anymore. The type of form factor you probably will be spending most of your time with is the ATX form factor. Now there's a third form factor that you need to be aware of, and that is the BTX form factor. BTX isn't as widely implemented yet, but it probably will be, because BTX does a better job at cooling the PC system. The important thing to remember with form factor is the fact that your case, your motherboard, and your power supply all must use exactly the same form factor. You cannot mix and match. For example, if you purchase an ATX case, then you must use an ATX power supply and an ATX motherboard. Well, how do you know what form factor each of these components use? Simply look on the packaging. It should tell you if it's an ATX or a BTX component. The next thing you need to do is purchase a supply. Now the power supply in a PC system has a very special role. To understand the role of the power supply, you need to understand that the components inside the PC, the motherboard, the CPU, the hard disk drive, the floppy disk drive, the DVD drive, all components use DC electrical power. Well, what kind of power comes through your wall circuit? AC power. Won't work, right? In order to use wall current with your PC system, you have to convert the AC alternating current into DC direct current. That's the job of the power supply. Now, here's the important point when you're purchasing a power supply. Power supplies are not all created equal. Some are better than others. Power supplies are rated by the amount of wattage they produce. They all produce the identical voltage, but they produce different amounts of that voltage or wattage. If you low-end power supply, the less expensive ones that produce only about 200 watts, you're probably asking for trouble. So, word to the wise, buy the best power supply that you can afford. Now they come in a variety of different wattages. On the very low end, you'll find 250 watts. On the high end, you see them go upwards of 450 to 500 watts. Again, I would purchase a power supply that provides at least 300. If you don't, you're going to be asking for trouble. Okay, here's the power supply that we're going to use to build our computer system. Now this power has a series of wires coming from the bottom. These have plugs that connect into the motherboard and into the hard disk drive and the floppy disk drive and the CD drives to provide power. On the other end of the power supply is a wall plug here that's used to connect it to the 110 or 120 volt AC current in your. It has a power switch here which turns this current from the wall off or on, and then over here is a fan. The power supply actually cools the components inside as well. Let's take a look at how we install the supply in a system now. Here's that we're going to use to build our PC system with. This is a really nice ATX case. Now the power supply goes in this hole right back here. And there's a hole here, there's a hole here, there's a hole down here, and then there's a hole over here that's slightly offset. It's not directly in line with the hole there. So what we need to do is get our power supply and get 4 screws. The screws should come with the supply or with the case. And then we need to look at the back of the power supply and line up the holes so they mate up with the holes in the case. So we slide this into place like that. Take our screws and start. Okay, I've got the screws started. Now I get my screwdriver. And I tighten them up. Alright, our power supply installed in the case. We're ready to go on to the next step now.
At this point, we've got our case picked out and purchased. We've got our power selected and purchased, and we've installed the power supply into the case. The next thing we need to do is install the motherboard. Now the motherboard is called the soul of the PC. It's not the heart, it's not the brains, it's the soul. It's what connects everything together. The mother job is to make it such that the CPU can communicate with, say, your soundboard, or with your or with your hard disk drive or your floppy disk drive. It really provides the connecting glue that makes in the computer work. Let's take a look at a typical motherboard. If you look very carefully, right here, you can see this white square is the CPU socket. In addition, over here, this white rectangle is the power connector. This is where we connect our supply to the motherboard. Over here, we have these two black sockets. These sockets are used for installing our memory modules. Over here are two hard disk connectors. These are ATA, otherwise called IDE, hard disk. Over here, probably can't see it very well, I'll tip it up just a little bit. Over here in the back is another connector. It kind of looks like a hard disk connector, but it's not. This is a disk connector. It's got fewer pins than the hard disk connector. You can always tell the difference by just counting the pins. You'll see this one has considerably fewer pins than these two. We also have back here what are called expansion slots. Expansion slots, we'll talk later on. Expansion slots are used to additional card system or expansion boards into the system that allow us to customize what the PC does. Now I'm going to turn this around, and you can see that it provides a bunch of different. For example, over here we have our mouse and our keyboard connector. Over here we have a USB connector, so we can connect USB devices to this motherboard. Over here we have a serial port, a serial device. Up here we have a printer port, so we can connect a parallel printer. Down here, a video port. This board even has a built-in video. We don't even have to install one if we don't want to. We can just use this one right here. Right here we have a network connector, so if we want to connect this system to this computer, we don't have to install a card. It's all built in. Connectors right there. Underneath it are a couple more connectors. And over here, notice there's things that look like audio. Well, they are audio jacks because this motherboard also has a built-in soundboard. With that, talk about the different factors you need to keep in mind when you're selecting a motherboard for the PC system that you're building. The first factor is, as we discussed earlier, the form factor. If you're using an ATX case, then you need an ATX motherboard as well. The next one that you need to keep in mind, the factor you need to keep in mind, is what type of CPU do you intend to install in this system? There's two general families of CPUs that you're going to be using. The first family comes from a company called Intel that you're probably familiar with, but there's also a competing company that makes CPUs called Advanced Micro Devices, or AMD. AMD sells really fast, really nice CPUs, generally at a lower cost with similar performance level as opposed to Intel. The issue here is that if you choose an AMD CPU, then your motherboard must be designed to support an AMD CPU. If you choose Intel, then the motherboard has to be designed to support an Intel CPU. And that brings us to the next issue, and that is the socket. Now remember, just a second ago I showed you the CPU socket on the motherboard. You need to purchase a motherboard whose socket is compatible with the particular CPU that you want to use. Another factor to keep in mind is the issue of expansion slots. When you purchase a motherboard, think about what it is you're going to do with that system. Make sure that you have enough expansion slots to handle the number of expansion cards you intend to install in the system. The last thing you need to keep in mind is just simple overall quality.
There's a general rule of thumb when you're dealing with motherboards, and that is the less you pay, the more problems you're going to have. Now, with these factors in mind, you can go ahead and choose your motherboard. Let's go now and see how we install it in our PC system. Okay, the first to do when installing a motherboard is insert stands into the appropriate holes in the bottom of the case. Now this little device that I'm holding in my fingers right here is called a standoff. It's a brass screw that has threads on this end and also has threads on the inside here. We're going to screw this into these holes in the bottom of the case, and then we'll put the motherboard on top of it and put a screw through the top of the motherboard that tightens down into these threads. Now the hard part about this is you have to figure out where to put the standoffs. You can see looking at the bottom of the case we have tons and tons of little holes where the standoffs can go. Now the easiest way to do this is to take your motherboard, put it inside, and just kind of eyeball which holes will need standoffs. So I've done that. Put my motherboard back like that, and then I'm just going to take and screws or my standoffs into the appropriate holes. Alright, now to put the motherboard in. Now before we do that, there's what we have to do. We have to install this faceplate. Now notice back this big red hole in the case where the motherboard external connectors through you can get at them to plug things in. The problem is that different motherboards use different configurations for these various connectors. Now, the case manufacturers don't want to have to manufacture specific cases matched up to specific motherboard configurations. Therefore, the rectangular hole right back here, and then they provide these templates, or these plates that provide the holes, or the appropriate holes in the appropriate locations for the different connectors on the motherboard. Now, if you have a really oddball motherboard, this connector might actually come with the motherboard itself. But usually the case will come with a whole stack of these. What you do is you thumb through them and find the one that matches up with the layout of the back of your motherboard. And then you just insert it into this hole. And we're ready to put the motherboard in. So we take our motherboard and we make sure that these line up. And one of the tricky things is you'll notice right template, it's got these little sticky out tabs, and you need to make sure that you get the underneath those tabs, and so they don't go into the plug itself. The tabs are there to kind of hold place. The screws that we use are a little bit different. I don't know if you can see this shot, but the screw actually has felt or rubber washer. It doesn't provide connectivity. We don't want current going through the screw case into the motherboard. So what we do is we put that little insulator on there to keep that from happening. So, putting this in place, start the screw here. Alright, I tightened all the screws down, one here, one here, one here, here. So our motherboard is now attached to the standoffs in the bottom of the case. The next thing we need to do is connect our power from our Pi into the motherboard. If you look at all the various wires coming out of your power supply, you'll notice one very large one. This connector plugs into this plug right here. Now, it's keyed so that it can only go in one way. If I were to reverse this and try to put it won't go. We just take our plug, connect it in like that, and we don't have to worry about it being backwards because it can't go backwards. Now, the next thing we need to do is to connect our front panel connectors to the motherboard. Now, you know that on the front of a PC you have all kinds of different things. You have the power switch, you have the reset switch, you have the power on light, we have the hard disk light. Well, all are connected to the motherboard in order for them to work. Now, if you look right down here, this set of switches right here are used to do just that. Now, most cases will have a series of wires such as this, and notice that these are all labeled. Since this green and white wire plug says power LED, and this plug says hard disk drive LED, and this connector says the power switch, and this connector is that switch. Well, these go on to a series of these pins in order to provide that given functionality. The hard part about this is knowing which set of pins do what. Now, find out, you check your motherboard documentation, and on some good motherboards it will actually label down here what pins do what. Now, I realize that you can't see this, and I can hardly read it myself, but on this motherboard it actually says where these different wires go. For instance, the speaker wire goes on a connect here, and don't worry about memorizing where these locations are, because they'll be different on this system that you're going to use, that you end up purchasing. I checked and found that the power LED light connects right here. It says P LED right above this, so the prongs right there. The next hard disk LED, I checked the documentation and found that they go right here on that set of connectors. Next is the reset switch, which I found out go on that set of pins. Then we have the power switch, goes on this set of pins. Oops, on this set of pins. Now, I want to make you aware of before we move on, and this little secondary connector right here. Now, this is used for some Pentium 4 motherboards. This is an auxiliary power connector. This must be connected in addition to the big plug from the power supply that we plugged in earlier. This is a wire off from the power supply. What you need to do is check your motherboard documentation and see if it requires this extra power connector. If it does, you need to make sure you buy a power supply that's labeled Pentium 4 compatible. If it's labeled Pentium 4 compatible, it will have this extra plug that you can connect to the motherboard. Now, not all Pentium 4 motherboards require it. That's the funny thing. This particular Pentium 4 motherboard does not have a extra auxiliary power plug, hence we don't need it, so we'll just tuck it out of the road.